Finally, we have an announcement about Elden Ring DLC. It's just a still image, however, there are things we can look at and unpack and speculate about. In this video, I'm going to analyze the image and go broad on what I think it could be showing because we really don't have too many details. I want to focus more on what it could be expanding or exploring, more than trying to guess what the story might be, because I would definitely get all of that wrong. Unfortunately, I was out of town when the announcement initially dropped, so I know that plenty of other lore creators have given their thoughts, and I've seen some of the general ideas floating around, but I haven't watched any of the analysis, so I will likely cover some of the same ideas that others have. But I apologize if there is some overlap, but not to be too bold, but I think there will be some novel nuggets of information and perspective in this video. Let's get into it. First, let's start with the title of the expansion, The Shadow of the Erdtree. This could be a shadow like a consequence or fallout from something, in this case the Erdtree. And if we are following this line of logic that shadow in this case means a consequence of the Erdtree and the Golden Order, then I think we need to look first at how there is actually two trees here. It appears that the Erdtree has another tree wrapping around it, and this makes me think of the idea that the Erdtree is a scion of the Great Tree, that it grew out of it through grafting, and that it was the scion that rose to prominence and took over, and now perhaps the rootstock or another scion is taking over. And if we are following that, then I would say that Deathroot taking over seems the most likely to me. The Deathroot item description says, "On the night of the dire plot, the stolen Rune of Death enabled the first death of a demigod. Later, the Rune of Death spread across the lands between, through the underground roots of the Great Tree, sprouting in the form of Deathroot." So just as I speculate that the Erdtree grew out of the Great Tree as a scion, Deathroot may also be doing the same thing, growing out of the roots of the Great Tree as well as the Erdtree, and choking out the Erdtree in order to become the new scion. And to add just a bit more into this, Enya the Finger Reader calls the Rune of Death the Forbidden Shadow that was plucked from the Golden Order, and of course also ties into Deathroot. And I think this is a good time to state that in the title, The Shadow of the Erdtree, that the O is the only letter in the expansion title, or even including Elden Ring, that has what appears to be roots or branches coming out of it in an almost Ouroboros shape, instead of the shattering stone-like presentation of all the other letters. Besides Godwyn and the Deathroot, it could also potentially be something relating to the dead Halig tree, which is also in a form a competitor to the Erdtree, though I am less convinced about that. And as a mild observation, the shape of the Halig tree is vaguely similar to the tree wrapping around the Erdtree, and if this is some kind of dream or spirit realm, it could be symbolic or relate to the two holy trees of the lands between that have died, but I think this is a little bit of a stretch, and I wouldn't consider that too heavily. But like I said, we're going broad here, so we're trying to capture all the potential ideas. And still considering the word shadow in the Shadow of the Erdtree expansion name, it could also be a meaning that is specific to Elden Ring. The Remembrance of the Black Blade says, Malekith was a shadow-bound beast given to his Empyrean, who is Marika. So could shadow in this context be talking about the shadows in Elden Ring who protect their Empyrean? And could a shadow in this context be a protector of the Erdtree? Between these two meanings of shadow, it could even be both, as Miyazaki is not above a good double meaning. Now I'd like to talk about the landscape of this image. The geography is not like anywhere in the lands between, and the odd placement of the ruins set in a vast field of wheat gives it a surreal tone, which is a point for me toward it being another realm and not in the lands between as we know it. In the foreground, we have a vast field of wheat featuring many spectral gravestones and stakes, stone sarcophagi, and ruined buildings. In the background, we have distant mountains, the tangled Erdtree and the other tree previously mentioned, with what appears to be the sun lower in the sky behind the trees, giving it a kind of somber, sad tone. And of course, there is also the figure prominently featured in the image, but we'll get to that in a minute. These spectral gravestones and these stone sarcophagi are both images of death and are as plentiful as the wheat in the field. Wheat is also associated in many cultures with birth, fertility, death, and resurrection. The stakes are reminiscent of the Sword of Awhile design in Dark Souls 3, but the ring is broken at the bottom, giving it a more cruciform look. All of these elements mentioned gesture towards death, which of course brings to mind Godwin and those who live in death, and ties it in with the idea of Deathroot overtaking the Erdtree. And when we're talking about spirits, it could also relate to Helfin, which is described in Helfin's steeple as the lampwood which guides the dead of the spirit world. The lamplight is similar to Grace in appearance, only it is said that it can only be seen by those who have met their death in battle. It's a bit of a stretch here, but could this version of the Erdtree be the lampwood? Alternatively, there are spectral lamps found out in the world featuring spirits, as well as tangible versions in Miquella's prayer room in Awhile, next to some pots of wheat, so there seems to be a potential connection there. I think we should keep in mind all of these elements as we continue into the video and we figure out who the figure is, as it is possible that Godwin, Miquella, and Helfin could all be part of this DLC. Moving on, we have the architecture in the image, and it is predominantly featuring these ruined archways that could have once functioned as part of a church. These archways are multifoil arches, which are arches that contain these smaller circular arches within the doorway. There are statues of saints above at the lintel, and the style of architecture here is a neo-Gothic style. We don't find this in the current game, but the architecture is most akin to these gazebo-like buildings found in Liurnia around the lake region and at Manus Celis. It is not exactly the same though, as the archways in the expansion image have more foils or arches within the doorway, a different column design, and the archway improbably breaks the lintel in this image. The pilasters along the sides feature this caduceus-esque pattern similar to the symbol of the halig tree and the design of Miquella's needle, as well as the depraved perfumers. We don't find these pilasters anywhere else in the current game, but this pattern or one similar is found in the architecture of the halig tree town. These structures being alien to the lands between as we know it from the game tells me that it is less likely that this image hints towards the DLC being in the past, as I would think we would find evidence of them elsewhere in the game, and strengthens the possibility of it being another realm beyond the lands between. Now I'd like to talk about the mysterious figure that is prominently featured in the image. They are on Torrent or another spirit steed. They are riding side saddle, probably because of the long gown, and is usually a style of riding associated with ladies. They have braided long blonde hair. And as for the pose shown here, every bit of some key art for something is intentional in some way. Being on a spirit steed, facing toward the landscape, same as the viewer, gives a posture that they're journeying into this place, like you see on so many open world video game covers, versus being in a defensive position facing the viewer. Also, being on Torrent or the spirit steed also gives a non-aggressive posture to the player, as we know Torrent to be a good boy. For my money, the most likely identity of this figure are either Miquella / Saint Trina, Marika, or a previously unknown character. If it is a previously unknown character, the golden blonde hair tells me that they might be from the golden lineage, and perhaps they could be a soulless demigod found in the walking mausoleums, as that would relate to death, which is heavily featured in this image. Let's explore Marika and what she might be doing in this image and evidence that it could be her. To be honest, I don't feel strongly that it is Marika, but she does have the long braided blonde hair and is someone who could be Torrent's former owner or someone who could get access to a spirit steed, being a goddess and all. Which, speaking of this, she is the goddess of the age of the Erdtree and the Golden Order, who plucked destined death from the Elden Ring. So if the tree is in fact being strangled by Deathroot, that could be cause for her to be in this place. I don't think this would be the past and a younger Marika for the reasons I mentioned about the landscape, as well as adding on that Stuff in the landscape like the Divine Towers are hinted to predate Marika's reign and would still be visible in a landscape before she founded the Golden Order. I feel strongly that this is another realm, likely a spirit world such as Helfen, which Marika could of course travel to, but at this time I don't have the information to adequately connect why she would be journeying here, but that doesn't rule it out. I think that Miquella, more specifically Saint Trina, is the most likely candidate for who we see in this image. Although we don't meet her in the game, the cut NPC Rico states this connection outright. Finally, I have found it, Saint Trina's, no, Lord Miquella's cadaver. This does not contradict the current content of Elden Ring, making a very strong argument that Saint Trina remains the alter ego of Miquella and who we see in this image. Although Miquella's body in this world has certainly undergone a horrible transformation, the same might not be true for Saint Trina, and may have even been Miquella's escape. Gideon Ofnir says about Miquella,
"Well, I wonder what comes next. If he continues his slumber within the cocoon, all would be well. But perhaps it would be safer to destroy it. Miquella is the one thing that remains a mystery to me."
I want to point out from this quote that slumber is an important word here, as well as Gideon's general belief that Miquella is not truly gone. Saint Trina is described more in the Sword of Saint Trina, which states, Saint Trina is an enigmatic figure. Some say she is a comely young girl, others are sure he is a boy. The only certainty is that their appearance was as sudden as their disappearance. Again, this duality speaks to the nature as an alter ego of Miquella, and although Miquella is depicted as very small and childlike, Saint Trina's torch suggests she may have grown up. Candle stand torch that burns with a light purple flame, the carvings depict Saint Trina, but in an adult form, somewhat unnervingly. I think all of this could be gesturing towards Saint Trina escaping the clutches of Mohg into the dream, or perhaps for another purpose, which aligns well with the questing vibe that the artwork is giving off. They are either running away or trying to journey somewhere. This could be the adult form of Saint Trina, who's wearing a white robe like Miquella, and whose multiple braids most closely match the depiction of Miquella we see in the opening cinematic. And while we're on the topic of Saint Trina and her torch, exploring these ideas reminded me of Demeter, Greek goddess of agriculture and the harvest, as well as a goddess with connections to the underworld. She is often depicted as carrying a torch to represent her search for her daughter Persephone, who was abducted and taken to the underworld by Hades. In cut content, Miquella's great rune is the Rune of Abundance, which according to the Japanese translation by Loki DS has connotations of a good or bountiful harvest. As mentioned before, in Miquella's prayer room, you can see wheat beside the altar and the tangible spectral lamps that guide spirits out in the world of the lands between. Demeter is also depicted with poppies, a flower known for inducing sleep, similar to Saint Trina, whose lily is used to craft consumables that cause sleep. Parallels between the goddess Demeter and the aspects of Miquella and Saint Trina are clear, and perhaps could be applied towards what the DLC could at least be in part about. Could Saint Trina, like Demeter, be in search of someone who slumbers, perhaps in death? You probably know where I'm going with this, but there is evidence to suggest Miquella was trying to reunite Godwyn with his body to give him a true death. The Golden Epitaph Sword states, a sword made to commemorate the death of Godwyn the Golden, first of the demigods to die, infused with the humble prayer of a young boy, O brother, Lord brother, please die a true death. Miquella, cursed to remain young and a stepbrother of Godwyn, is most likely to have infused this prayer into the sword, wishing Godwyn a true death. And there is further evidence at Castle Sol to suggest that Miquella was trying to do this. A ghost at Castle Sol says, O great sun, frigid son of Sol, surrender yourself to the eclipse, grant life to the soulless bones. And there is another ghost who says, Lord Miquella, forgive me. The sun has not been swallowed, our prayers were lacking, your comrade remains soulless. I will never set my eyes upon it now, your divine Halling Tree. All of this paints the picture that Miquella endeavored to reunite Godwyn's soul with his body to grant a true death. It is possible the DLC could continue with Saint Trina continuing the search for Godwyn's soul in Helfen, or whatever this place is, in order to do this. Death and sleep are closely related in From games, and in Elden Ring the item descriptions about sleep and slumber also allude to death as a form of sleep. The slumbering egg states, "All eggs that will never hatch, prized as a symbol of the most sublime slumber." Saint Trina and Mikola as a Demeter figure seem like the right god to search for Godwyn in a land where the dead and slumbering preside. On a much more mundane, mechanical level, great runes for Mikola, Godwyn, and Ranni are all missing and could be sensible items to include in expansion, which necessitates in some ways also having those characters there. And if you'll allow a final tangent, thinking about sleep in Elden Ring brought a few connections to mind. Malenia is said to have gone into a deep slumber after nuking Caelid in the Battle of Aeonia. Ranni often slumbers in her puppet form, and we access Godwyn's nightmare to fight Fortisax. Could it be that Saint Trina is able to interact with these characters while they slumber? In the case of Malenia, it could almost be seen that her slumber is a form of protection after blooming. Who knows, just a final thought and potential topic that could relate to the DLC. And there you have it, some thoughts about what the DLC could be tackling based on the limited information present. Hopefully we will get more information soon, like a release date. There are rumors that it may not be coming for some time, which seems more likely given that this announcement didn't have a date and was a single image instead of a full trailer. I still believe we could see it in the next few months, but it could go either way. If it isn't coming until the end of 2023 or early 2024, I would personally have preferred no information come until it is closer to release, but those are just my preferences. I also would be a bit surprised if From allocated 18 months of resources to a DLC, but depending on how beefy the DLC is, it could very well be the case. Either way, I'm excited for more Elden Ring and can't wait to see what the future brings. Let me know in the comments what you think about the DLC, when it might be coming out, what it could be about. And if you're looking for more Elden Ring content, including the DLC, please subscribe to the Lore Hunter. Thanks for watching.